delving into the more relevant questions, I'll just ask Ms. Shaw, and maybe this is not the IGF to know this, but could you give us an opinion of where we find these State Department employees that seem so clueless about what's going on in the real world? Is there a way we could change the hiring practices? Are the universities that train these people so totally flawed or lacking in common sense? How do they get this so wrong when just an average guy, boots on the ground, so to speak, understood exactly what was going on?
So thank you for your question. I don't know that we have work specifically on that issue, although we do look in the context of contract oversight and monitoring and find that there are folks filling in these positions that lack the technical expertise, lack the experience. And so we do have some work that point to those issues, but on the broader question, I'm afraid I don't have an answer.
Yeah, okay. I'm not really worried about technical expertise. I'm worried about common sense, which seem to be entirely lacking. Ms. Angelara, what ongoing programs are taking place in Afghanistan today?
Sure, thank you for your question. In FY22, USAID appropriated or spent $912 million in Afghanistan. Through Q1 and Q2 of FY23, it's about $599 million, and it's more heavily weighted towards humanitarian assistance, mostly food aid, and a very small portion of it, about $59 million in development funding, but mostly humanitarian food assistance.
Well, thank you. Are there any indications that with $900 million, is some of that going towards the goal of making sure that the people of Afghanistan no longer hate us?
I think the goal of getting food to people, there have been significant impediments to that in the last couple of months with the ban on women working for NGOs and most recently the UN. As of right now, the UN has halted much of its programming for humanitarian assistance, I believe until May 5th, while they decide how to continue implementing programming.
Okay, how does USAID ensure the assistance is not going to Taliban?
USAID has third-party monitoring and multi-tiered monitoring, and what we do as USAID is evaluate the type of monitoring they have in place right now.
Okay, we'll go to Mr. Sopko. Today you're releasing your 2023 high-risk list that examines the ongoing risk to U.S. taxpayer dollars. What are the biggest risks that you've identified?
I think the biggest risk is the interference the Taliban has with the UN and Department of State and USAID programs. We do know that the UN has told us that they are siphoning money off. They're actually going beyond what the Ghani administration and stealing money from us. So that started. I think the second problem is that we have to rely on international trust funds like the UN. We have identified in the past over the last 12 years that these trust funds with the UN, World Bank, et cetera, do very little oversight and are very skimpy on giving information about it, and we think that's continuing, so we don't think state and aid. And when we specifically asked, to give you an example, when we asked state, how much money is the Taliban getting from these programs, they couldn't answer because they don't know. So I can't tell you how much, but that's the biggest. The other serious threat to our assistance, I think, is the refusal of state and aid to answer the simplest oversight questions that we have, like who are your implementing partners? Can we interview them? We are not getting those answers back. So I would say the three biggest threats is the Taliban, it's the fact we're over-relying on these international institutions, which in the past have been horrible in providing us appropriate information. And the third thing is state and aid's abject refusal to allow oversight.
Could you just rattle off quickly one more time the international organizations that this body and quite frankly the press corps should know cannot really be trusted with taxpayer dollars?
Well, mainly there's a number of UN organizations we've identified in the past. You also have the World Food Program. You have something called the Colombo Plan, which the State Department specifically ordered not to talk to us when we're doing an audit of one of their programs on this. I think the World Bank is also involved. I would have to give you a further list of all the programs involved.
Thanks. Well, it's very illuminating. Thank you much for giving me another couple seconds.
Very good. Chair recognizes the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sopko, thank you for your service as the Special Inspector General for the Afghan reconstruction and for the reports you've authored examining the factors that led to the collapse of the Afghan government and its security forces. Your work is critical also going forward, as you were just saying. Committee Democrats strongly support the work of all the IGs, and we will continue to urge all of the agencies to cooperate fully with your efforts. In your February 2023 report, you said there were 6 key short-term reasons for collapse of the Afghan armed forces, but the very first one that you cite was Donald Trump's decision to negotiate with the Taliban for a U.S. withdrawal, negotiations that excluded the Afghan government, and then to give the Taliban exactly what they wanted, which was the commitment of the U.S. to completely withdraw all U.S. and allied forces, as well as all contractors, and the April 2021 announcement following through on that agreement. You write about how this agreement between the Taliban and the Trump administration led the jubilant Taliban to declare victory on behalf of the entire Muslim and Mujahideen nation, how it destroyed morale within the Afghan military and security forces, and how it, quote, catalyzed the collapse of the government. Mr. Sopko, did President Trump's decision to negotiate directly with the Taliban and exclude President Ghani and the Afghan government from negotiations undermine the ability of the Afghan government to negotiate a stable peace agreement with the Taliban and to defend itself and the nation against Taliban military attack?
As we say, this was one of many decisions, but you're correct. That decision itself undercut the morale of the average Afghan soldier and the average Afghan civilian. But the follow-up is, as we say in the report, we also say that the decision by the Biden administration to follow also added to that elimination of the morale of the average Afghan soldier to continue fighting.
By following that path, I gotcha.
Yes.
Did the Trump-Taliban agreement embolden what you call a reinvigorated Taliban to increase its violent attacks against the Afghan armed forces?
Yes, it did. It did. And if you talk to the Afghan generals and people who are on the ground, which we did, they'll tell you that that is exactly what happened.
Well, one of the concessions that Trump made to the Taliban was allowing the release of 5,000 Taliban prisoners then being held by the Afghan government, including perpetrators of terrorist attacks, in return for the Taliban freeing, I believe it was 1,000 Afghan prisoners. Thousands of these Taliban-released fighters immediately returned to the battlefield and participated, and in some cases led the Taliban onslaught against Afghan cities, even though there was a provision saying that they were not supposed to rejoin the fight. In September of 2021, after the fall of Kabul, former President Trump lied about this deal, saying, quote, the inept Afghan government led by corrupt President Ghani released 5,000 prisoners, not the Trump administration. We know this is a lie from the language of the Trump-Taliban agreement itself, which explicitly contemplated the release of, quote, up to 5,000 prisoners by March 10th, 2020. Moreover, your report establishes that the Trump administration actually pressured the Afghan government to agree to this condition. Mr. Sopko, isn't it correct that the Afghan government initially opposed the release of these Taliban and terrorist prisoners?
You're correct.
And how did the Trump administration specifically work to pressure or coerce the Afghan government to agree to this prisoner exchange?
I believe it may have been Secretary of State Pompeo, I believe our report indicates, may have actually threatened funding to the Afghan government. I believe. I'd have to double check.
Secretary Pompeo, according to the report, threatened to withhold U.S. aid.
That's correct.
If they didn't go along with it. So just to get the picture straight, President Trump excludes the Afghan government from the negotiation, takes it upon himself to work directly with the Taliban, then negotiates a provision for the release of 5,000 Taliban fighters, including terrorists. The Afghan government opposes it, and in order to coerce them to go along with it, Secretary Pompeo says he'll withhold aid. The government goes along with it, and then the disaster ensues. Now, obviously, that infusion of thousands of new fighters didn't necessarily make the difference, but it certainly made a pretty big difference. Your report tells a shocking story indeed. I thank you for your service, and I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Palmer for 5 minutes.
I would point out that the peace agreement with the Taliban made in February of 2020, at least through September 2020, there were 0 American service men or women killed in Afghanistan. I do have a question for Mr. Storch, Mr. Sopko. Apparently, the U.S. government gave the Taliban a list of Americans and Afghan allies, names of people that were trying to get to the airport in Kabul. Are you aware of that, Mr. Storch?
Our office hasn't done any work on that. I will say that we are aware of the after-action work that was done by the administration, and I immediately requested and obtained full copies of that, and my team and I are reviewing that.
Mr. Sopko, were you aware that a list of Americans and Afghan allies was given to the Taliban?
I am only aware from what's been reported in the press. I'm not aware of it. Again, we did not look at the withdrawal, so I can't answer that question.
Okay, I have a lot of concern about that because, and this is for the State Department, you don't need to respond, but I do think the State Department needs to respond and on this question. And if there was a list, who was on the list, and can they account for those people? It was characterized in the media by anonymous sources within the State Department that it was tantamount to giving the Taliban a kill list. Mr. Storch, were there any American soldiers remaining in Afghanistan after the final withdrawal from Kabul?
Again, as I testified, Congressman, following the withdrawal,
So you're not, it's a yes or no.
I don't have the answer to that.
Do you know, Mr. Sopko?
No, I don't.
Do any of you know in the weeks following the withdrawal whether or not there were American service members who are still there? I'll follow up on that later. I may need to talk to someone else about this. Did any of you encounter anyone with the State Department that expressed or exhibited any level of animosity or negative feelings toward American servicemen and women or American contractors or Afghan allies? And did you, in your efforts to do your investigations, did you encounter anyone that displayed any animosity toward U.S. involvement in Afghanistan? So yes or no. If you don't know.
You're saying State Department employees who expressed that?
Have you talked to people outside of Washington?
Oh, absolutely. We interviewed 800 some people, and since the U.S. government wouldn't talk to us, we interviewed a lot of former and current employees privately. Yes, we talked to a lot of people. I don't remember encountering anybody expressing any animosity to U.S. troops and the people we interviewed.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I'll follow up on this later with you. Mr. Sopko, you've already expressed some reservations about U.S. funding, sending billions of dollars to Afghanistan to promote human rights, to support the rights of women and girls, particularly the rights of women and girls to work, to get an education. How confident are you that the Taliban will make sure that every dollar of U.S. taxpayers' money will go toward promoting and supporting human rights, and particularly in regard to women and girls?
I don't trust the Taliban as far as you can throw them. And the information we're getting, again, not from the State Department, who isn't talking to us, or USAID, who's giving us access, is that the Taliban are already diverting funds. Let me just correct one thing, sir. I am not opposed to humanitarian assistance. That's a policy decision that Congress and the President and the administration have to make. I just am saying, if the purpose is to help the Afghan people, we have to have effective oversight to ensure the money goes to those people and not to some Taliban. And I would just say, I haven't seen a starving Taliban fighter on TV. They all seem to be fat, dumb, and happy. I see a lot of starving Afghan children on TV. So I'm wondering where all this funding is going.
Well, I think we're all aware that withholding food and sustenance is a way to maintain control over a population. And I have some serious concerns about what's happened there post the withdrawal and how it was handled in the efforts to post-withdrawal of private contractors to extract people, that frankly some of that's still going on. The fact that the Taliban was going house to house, people could hear gunshots in the streets. I'm very concerned about what's happened in that country, and I support humanitarian aid, but I don't support giving money to people who are murdering people in the street, who are denying people basic human rights, and who are basically withholding the opportunities that for 20 years Afghan women and girls enjoyed while we were there. My last question, if I may, Mr. Chairman, is did anyone at the Department of Defense or the State Department express any reservations about abandoning Bagram?
Gentlemen's time's expired, but feel free to answer the question.
Yeah, we reported out in our lead IG reporting regarding all the facts and case, but we haven't done any oversight work related to that. Okay. And I would say as well, if I can, I know we're over, but that goes to the point that Mr. Sopko made earlier. Many of these are policy, strategic decisions, and so as IGs, our role is, once those are set, to do oversight that determines whether the policy or strategy is being done efficiently or effectively.
I thank the Chairman. I yield back.
Chair recognizes Ms. Norton for 5 minutes.
I thank the Chair. I strongly agree with the Inspectors General about the need to support the people of Afghanistan amidst ongoing economic and humanitarian crises, and to uplift Afghan women and girls whose basic human rights have been stripped away by the Taliban. It is critical that we provide financial assistance while isolating and condemning the Taliban regime. This new challenge requires a thoughtful and careful approach to delivering aid. While providing this vital assistance is not without risk, we must not turn our backs on our allies. Instead, we must work with the Inspectors General and the administration to identify effective ways to enable direct assistance with appropriate guardrails. We must continue working on new solutions to provide the much-needed relief to Afghan people, while ensuring this aid stays out of the hands of the Taliban. Now, Chairman Comer is holding today's hearing to focus on the events surrounding the August 2021 withdrawal in Afghanistan, and the chairman has made his position on the withdrawal very clear over the past few years. In an April 2021 interview, Chairman Comer said regarding President Biden's decision to complete the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan by September 2021, and I quote, "That's probably the first decision Joe Biden's made that I actually agree with. I strongly support removing all the troops from Afghanistan. I think that the American public has been ready to leave Afghanistan for at least a decade," end quote. And it wasn't just Chairman Comer. Several Republican members of the committee praised President Biden for withdrawing troops from Afghanistan. In March 2021, Mr. Biggs criticized President Biden for failing to withdraw troops from Afghanistan sooner, writing, and I quote, "You still suggest a May 1st withdrawal date isn't possible. That kind of thinking has kept us in Afghanistan for 20 years, end quote. In 2021, Mr. Mace stated on Fox News, "I've never been shy to disagree with the administration, but I couldn't agree more with bringing our troops home after 2 decades of war in Afghanistan, a policy former President Trump and now President agree on." Mr. Sopko, in your testimony today, you stated that while the Trump administration's decision to sign the Doha Agreement and the Biden administration's decision to follow through with the withdrawal were immediate factors precipitating the collapse of the Afghan government and its security forces, those decisions had antecedents that stretched to the beginning of the mission of 2001. Mr. Sopko, it sounds like it is your view that after 20 years in Afghanistan, the U.S. failed to build stable Afghan institutions that could survive the withdrawal of U.S. troops from the country. Is that right?
You're absolutely correct. That's what we found.
Mr. Sopko, you have been warning for years that this was the case, that Afghan institutions would not survive the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan. Is that right?
Yes, it is. Going back to almost as soon as I started in 2012, we've been raising concerns.
Today, my Republican colleagues who so enthusiastically supported the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan seek to blame the Biden-Harris administration for results of that withdrawal. I hope my Republican colleagues will pause their political posturing so that together we can work on learning the lessons that our country's 20-year involvement in Afghanistan teach us. I yield.